What would you do if the people who brought you into this world demanded you pay for it with everything you are? My name is Elise Harper, and at 26, I thought I'd finally escaped the suffocating grip of my parents. I was wrong. I grew up in a house that felt more like a battlefield than a home. My mother, Vivian, was a storm of criticism, her words sharp enough to carve wounds that never healed. My father, Richard, was her silent accomplice, his apathy a cold weight that crushed any hope of warmth. They didn't just raise Methy, sculpted me into their punching bag, blaming me for every failure in their lives. I was the reason they never traveled, never succeeded, never loved each other. By the time I was 18, I knew I had to leave or lose myself entirely. So I did. I cut them off, moved across the country, and built a quiet life in Seattle, working as a librarian, finding solace in books and the stillness they offered. For 8 years, I thought I was free. Then the letter came. It was a crisp September morning when I found the envelope slipped under my apartment door, the kind of official paper that screams trouble. My parents were suing me. The reason? They claimed I owed them for the cost of my existence, every penny spent on my upbringing, from diapers to school supplies, with interest. They argued that by cutting them off, I'd breached an unspoken contract, that my birth entitled them to my lifelong gratitude and financial repayment. The lawsuit demanded $500,000, a sum I couldn't fathom, let alone pay. I stood frozen in my tiny kitchen, the letter trembling in my hands, wondering how love could twist into something so grotesque. The courtroom was a sterile cage, its polished wood and fluorescent lights amplifying my isolation. I represented myself, unable to afford a lawyer, while my parents sat across the room, their faces unreadable. Vivian's eyes glinted with something like triumph, as if this was her final chance to control me. Richard stared at the floor, as always, avoiding the mess he'd helped create. The judge, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, listened as their lawyer spun a tale of sacrifice, how they'd given up dreams to raise me, how my abandonment had left them destitute. I wanted to scream that they'd never been parents, only wardens, but I held my tongue, clutching the journal where I'd documented years of their cruelty. As the trial unfolded, I felt the weight of their accusations pressing down. They presented receipts, bank statements, even a hospital bill for my birth, as if I'd chosen to be born. The absurdity was almost laughable, but the stakes weren't. If they won, I'd lose everything: me savings, my apartment, my fragile sense of peace. I took the stand, my voice shaky but steady, and read from my journal. Entries from when I was 12, describing how Vivian locked me in my room for a week because I'd spilled juice on her favorite rug. Notes from 16, when Richard ignored my pleas for help with a school bully, saying I deserved it for being weak. The courtroom grew quiet, the air thick with the truth I'd carried alone for so long. Then came a twist I hadn't expected. On the third day, a woman slipped into the courtroom, her presence so unassuming I barely noticed her at first. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a worn scarf wrapped around her shoulders. During a recess, she approached me, her hands trembling as she introduced herself as Margaret, my mother's former co-worker. She'd heard about the lawsuit through a mutual acquaintance and couldn't stay silent. Margaret testified that Vivian had once confessed to her, over coffee years ago, that she'd only had me to fix her failing marriagea plan that backfired when Richard grew more distant. Margaret's voice cracked as she described Vivian's bitterness, how she'd called me a burden before I was even born. The revelation hit me like a wave, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed the truth I'd always felt but never named. I was never wanted. Margaret's testimony shifted the room's energy. The judge's expression softened, and even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. I saw Vivian flinch, her mask of righteousness cracking, while Richard's shoulders slumped further. Margaret's words didn't erase my pain, but they gave it context, a strange kind of validation. She wasn't there to save Mesh, was there to speak the truth, and that was enough to tip the scales. In my closing statement, I didn't beg or plead. I looked directly at the judge and said, I didn't ask to be born, but I was. I didn't ask for their pain, but I carried it. This lawsuit isn't about money, it's about control. They want to punish me for choosing myself. My voice broke on the last word, and I let it. I was done hiding. The judge ruled in my favor, dismissing the case as baseless. She didn't mince words, calling my parents' claims an egregious misuse of the legal system. As the gavel fell, I felt no triumph, only a hollow relief. Vivian stormed out, her heels clicking furiously, while Richard lingered, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in years. I thought I saw regret, but it was too late for that. I walked out of the courthouse into the Seattle rain, my journal tucked under my arm, feeling lighter but not whole. In the weeks that followed, I tried to rebuild. I kept my job at the library, finding comfort in the routine of shelving books and helping patrons. But Margaret stayed in touch, her unexpected kindness a lifeline I hadn't known I needed. She invited me to coffee, shared stories of her own fractured family, and listened without judgment. Through her, I met others who'd walked away from toxic ties, people who understood the guilt and freedom of choosing yourself. They weren't my family, but they were something closure, a community born for shared scars. The lawsuit left me with no savings and a lingering fear that my parents might try again, but also gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity. I'd spent my life believing I was the problem, that my existence was a debt I could never repay. Now I saw the truth. My parents' choices weren't my fault, and their pain wasn't my burden. I was born into their chaos, but I didn't have to stay there. As I sit in my apartment now, rain tapping against the window, I think about the word family. It's not the one I was born into, but the one I'm building piece by piece, person by person. Margaret's smile, the quiet nods of strangers who've become friends, the weight of my journal no longer a secret, but a story I've survived. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out. I cut off my toxic parents, and they try to make me pay for it. But I'm still here, standing, breathing, living. And that's enough.